An Ulian soldier screamed as a ravenous grizzly bear ripped him apart, titanium armor shredding like tissue paper. The invasion of Earth was supposed to be quick and easy, a minor conquest for the Ulians in their galactic war. With massively superior technology, the aliens arrived expecting to roll over the primitive humans with minimal effort. But they didn't count on the tenacity of Earth's wildlife. The Ulians established beachheads in major cities, their sleek ships hovering ominously as the world panicked. Powerful energy weapons and impenetrable force fields made short work of Earth's militaries. Heavily armored Ulian infantry marched through the streets, seizing control of strategic locations. Sergeant Samuel Taylor, an Army Ranger, barely escaped as aliens overran his base. He led a small band of survivors into the wilderness, beginning a guerrilla resistance. But unbeknownst to Taylor or the Ulians, Earth itself would prove the invaders' greatest foe. The Ulians, used to sterile ships and bioengineered ecosystems, were woefully unprepared for Earth's raw, chaotic biosphere. As they pushed into forests, jungles, and mountains to root out human rebels, the aliens found themselves beset by swarms of insects, flocks of birds, packs of wolves, and countless other beasts. Ulian armor, designed for interstellar warfare, offered scant protection against thrashing shark jaws or crushing anaconda coils. Powerful energy shields flickered and died against rhinoceros charges and rampaging elephants. No matter how many creatures they killed, more always came. In their arrogance, the Ulians had dismissed Earth as a primitive backwater. Now they faced a savage gauntlet of tooth and claw, a planet resisting invasion with every ounce of its wild nature. No one could have guessed it, but Earth's humble creatures might just be humanity's salvation against alien conquest. Commander Ceres strode through the rubble-strewn streets of Manhattan, his polished black boots crunching on shattered concrete and twisted rebar. Around him, Ulian troopers secured the perimeter of their new forward operating base, the sleek silver structures of their prefabricated shelters rising incongruously amidst the ruins. "Status report," Ceres barked into his comm implant. "Perimeter established, sir," replied his second-in-command, Lieutenant Zor. "All systems online and operational." Ceres nodded, surveying the conquered cityscape. The primitive humans had been easily subdued, their feeble resistance crushed beneath the Ulians' superior firepower. Now they would root out the last pockets of insurgency and bring this backwater planet to heel. "Dispatch patrols into the surrounding area," Ceres ordered. "We must clear the region of any remaining human guerrillas. This world will be ours." As the Ulian soldiers marched out into the wilderness, their gleaming armor and high-powered weapons contrasting starkly with the rugged terrain, they remained oblivious to the countless eyes watching from the shadows. Earth's fauna sized up these strange invaders, instinct and eons of evolution preparing them for the coming clash. Back at the FOB, Ulian technicians monitored the base's myriad systems, their advanced biofilters and decontamination fields humming quietly as they maintained a sterile bubble amidst the planet's chaotic biosphere. But even their cutting-edge technology could not keep out the tiniest of Earth's inhabitants. At first, the insects were merely an annoyance, tiny gnats and mosquitoes slipping through the perimeter to buzz around the bright lights and sleek surfaces of the Ulian structures. But as the alien activity increased, so too did the insect presence, until swarms of bugs filled the air, clogging vents, shorting out delicate equipment, and generally making life miserable for the fastidious Ulians. In the ops center, Ceres growled in frustration as another system flickered and died, shorted out by a kamikaze moth. Around him, his subordinates swatted futilely at the whining swarms. "Get these damn things under control," the commander snapped. But that was easier said than done. Miles away, deep in the forests of Georgia, Sergeant Samuel Taylor crouched motionless in the undergrowth, his dirt-streaked fatigues blending seamlessly with the foliage. Beside him, the ragged remnants of his squad checked their weapons with unshakable focus. They had been on the run for days, harried by Ulian hunter-killer teams and their relentless drones. But Taylor was a savvy woodsman, and he used the dense terrain to his advantage, leading the aliens into one ambush after another. A twig snapped nearby and Taylor froze, his rifle snapping up to track the sound. Through the scope, he glimpsed a flash of silver. An Ullian patrol, their armor gleaming amidst the shadowed tree trunks. Taylor smiled coldly. The aliens were adapting to the forest, but they still stuck out like sore thumbs to his experienced eye. With a series of quick hand signals, Taylor directed his men into position. As the Ullians pushed deeper into the forest, the humans shadowed them, ghosts drifting through the green. Ahead, the Ullian point man stumbled, his leg twisting as his boots sank into a patch of soft earth. He cursed, struggling to free himself, but the more he thrashed, the more the soggy soil sucked at his limbs. Within moments, he was waist-deep in the muck, his armor's servos whining as they strained against the inexorable pull of the quicksand. His comrades rushed to assist, but as they neared the edge of the concealed pit, a chorus of angry buzzing rose from the undergrowth. A swarm of hornets, their nest disturbed by the aliens' passage, erupted from the foliage in a furious cloud. The Ullians reeled back, swatting ineffectually at the enraged insects as they swarmed exposed joints and visor seals. Taylor watched the aliens' panicked gyrations with cold satisfaction. The Ullians might have conquered the cities, but out here, in the wild, the invaders were just another part of the food chain. Signaling his men, Taylor melted back into the forest, leaving the hapless aliens to the mercies of the swamp. As the Ullian incursion spread across the globe, the aliens found themselves beset on all sides by Earth's implacable wildlife. In the Amazon, clouds of biting flies swarmed so thickly that they choked intakes and fouled air filters, suffocating Ullian vehicles. In the African savanna, beetles crawled into power relays and nested in circuit boards, their carapaces conducting stray current with catastrophic results. And in the world's oceans, the invaders' anti-grav propulsion proved an irresistible lure to great whites and orcas, the powerful predators savaging hull plates like chew toys. At the New York FOB, Commander Series paced like a caged animal, his patience worn thin by the constant irritations of Earth's environment. As reports flooded in of mysterious illnesses ravaging his troops, of critical systems failing due to animal attacks and insect infiltration, the commander found himself facing an enemy unlike any he had ever encountered before. This world would not be easily tamed, Series realized, but the Ullians had not carved out their stellar empire by backing down from a challenge. If it took turning the entire planet's biosphere against the natives, then that's exactly what they would do. This was a fight for survival now, one the Ullians had no intention of losing. But as Series schemed and plotted, Earth's greatest warriors watched and waited in the shadows. Lions and tigers, bears and wolves, apex predators honed by millions of years of evolution into the perfect killing machines. And they had just found some interesting new prey. The Ullians thought they understood war, but they were about to learn that on Earth everything fights, and the greatest battles were often won by tooth and claw. Lieutenant Zara's boots sank into the damp earth as she led her platoon through the dense undergrowth of Olympic National Park. Towering evergreens blocked out the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The constant drip of moisture from the canopy above created an eerie percussion, punctuated by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. "Fan out," Zara ordered, her voice tight with frustration. "And watch your footing. This terrain is treacherous." Her soldiers complied, their sleek armor scraping against rough bark and tangled vines as they spread into formation. Zara frowned, noting how their usually precise movements were hampered by the uneven ground and close-packed trees. A low growl echoed through the forest, freezing the Ullians in their tracks. Zara's hand flew to her weapon, eyes scanning the greenery for any sign of movement. For a moment, all was still. Then chaos erupted. Gray blurs exploded from the undergrowth, snarling and snapping. Wolves, Zara realized with a jolt of surprise. But these were no ordinary pack. Their attacks were coordinated, precise. "Open fire!" she shouted, raising her energy rifle. Beams of searing light lanced out, scorching bark and vaporizing leaves. But the wolves were already gone, melting back into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. "Sit rep," Zara barked into her comm. "2 men down, Lieutenant," came the shaky reply. "Armor breached at the joints. These things, they knew exactly where to hit us." Before Zara could respond, Another wolf lunged from behind a fallen log, clamping its powerful jaws around an Ullian soldier's leg. The alien screamed, his armor buckling under the pressure. His comrades turned, weapons raised, but hesitated to fire for fear of hitting their own. In that moment of indecision, more wolves struck. Zara watched in horror as her platoon was methodically picked apart, the Earth predators using the terrain to isolate and overwhelm her troops. "Fall back," she ordered, firing wildly into the trees. "Regroup at the clearing." But as they retreated, Zara caught a glimpse of something that chilled her to the core. A grizzled wolf, larger than the others, watching from atop a rocky outcrop. Its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Meanwhile, in the heart of conquered Manhattan, Commander Ceres stalked through the halls of the Ullian forward operating base, his usual crisp stride reduced to an angry stomp. All around him, soldiers and technicians scrambled to contain the latest crisis. "Report," he snapped at Dr. Zelra, who was bent over a diagnostic panel in the medical bay. The doctor looked up, her luminous eyes clouded with worry. "It's spreading faster than we can contain it, sir. These Earth microbes, they're unlike anything in our database. Our immune boosters are barely slowing them down." Ceres growled, smacking his fist against the wall. "Unacceptable. I want solutions, not excuses." "With all due respect, Commander," Zelra replied, her voice steady despite Ceres' outburst. "We're dealing with an entire planet's worth of hostile biology. It will take time to—" Her words were cut off by a piercing shriek from the nearby storage area. They rushed to investigate, finding a young Ullian trooper frantically batting at his armor. "Get them off!" he cried. "They're everywhere!" Ceres recoiled in disgust as he saw the source of the soldier's panic. A writhing mass of cockroaches pouring from a ruptured supply crate. The insects swarmed over the trooper, seeking out any gap in his protective gear. "Seal off this section," Ceres ordered, fighting to keep the revulsion from his voice. "And get me a secure line to high command. We need reinforcements, and we need them now." As the commander turned to leave, Dr. Zelra called after him. "Sir, there's something else. We're picking up increased chatter from the human resistance. They seem to be coordinating something." Ceres paused, a cold dread settling in his stomach. He had assumed the primitive humans were beaten, reduced to scattered bands of ineffectual guerrillas. But if they were organizing a counterattack now, when his forces were at their most vulnerable? He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. No, he couldn't let doubt creep in. The Ullians would adapt as they always had. This world would fall no matter what it threw at them. But as Ceres strode away, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this campaign was rapidly spiraling out of control. And somewhere in the wilds of Earth, a grizzled wolf raised its head and howled, the sound carrying far across the contested planet. As Ceres paced the command center, alarms blared throughout the Ullian forward operating base. A technician burst through the door, his armor stained with grime. "Commander, we have a situation," he gasped. "The city's drainage systems, they're—" Before he could finish, a high-pitched squeal echoed through the room. Ceres whirled around, his eyes widening in horror as a tide of fur and teeth poured from a ventilation grate. Rats, thousands of them. "Seal the exits," Ceres barked, drawing his sidearm. But it was too late. The rodents swarmed across consoles and crawled up walls, their sheer numbers overwhelming every defense. Outside, Sergeant Samuel Taylor crouched behind a crumbling storefront, watching with grim satisfaction as chaos erupted within the Ullian compound. The screeching of alarms mingled with panicked shouts and the chittering of countless rats. "Phase 1 complete," he muttered into his comm. "Move to secondary targets." Across the city, other resistance cells sprang into action. They used makeshift catapults to launch writhing masses of cockroaches onto Ullian supply depots. Swarms of angry hornets, their nests carefully transported from the countryside, were released near barracks and staging areas. Inside the fob, Ceres stumbled through corridors teeming with vermin. His troops fired wildly, energy beams scorching walls and floor, but barely denting the rodent horde. The sickly sweet stench of burnt fur filled the air. "Get me a secure channel to orbital command," Ceres shouted, swatting rats from his shoulders. But as he reached the communications hub, he found the equipment in ruins, gnawed cables sparking uselessly. A violent coughing fit racked his body. Ceres felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. How many diseases were these creatures carrying? Meanwhile, in the forests of Olympic National Park, Lieutenant Zara and her battered squad scrambled up a rocky slope. Behind them, the triumphant howls of wolves echoed through the trees. "Almost there," Zara panted. "The extraction point is just over this ridge." A thunderous roar stopped them in their tracks. At the top of the hill stood a massive grizzly bear, her cubs cowering behind her. The beast's eyes blazed with protective fury. "Back away slowly," Zara ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. The mother bear charged, her powerful limbs eating up the distance between them in seconds. Zara's troops scattered, their carefully honed tactics useless against this force of nature. As they fled deeper into the wilderness, Zara caught glimpses of other bears tearing through Ulian equipment. Sensor arrays toppled and mines detonated harmlessly as the animals reclaimed their territory. Back in Manhattan, Ceres made a fateful decision. "Bring in the heavy artillery," he croaked, his throat raw from the polluted air. "Level this infestation if you have to." The thunderous booms of orbital strikes shook the city, but each impact only worsened the situation, rupturing sewer lines and driving more rats to the surface. The vermin flowed like a living river through the streets, overwhelming Ulian positions. As the sounds of battle echoed across the globe, the Ulian High Command received a stream of increasingly desperate transmissions. From the Amazon to the African savanna, their forces were being overwhelmed not by human weapons, but by the planet's own immune system. Ceres staggered to the roof of the FOB, gazing out at the chaos engulfing his invasion force. In that moment, he knew the bitter truth. They had lost. Earth itself had rejected them. "All units," he rasped into his communicator, "initiate emergency evacuation protocol. I repeat, full retreat." But even as the order went out, Ceres wondered if it was already too late. In the skies above, the first Ulian transports struggled to take off, their hulls crawling with clinging lifeforms, determined to hitch a ride off-world. As Ceres's raspy voice crackled over the comm channels ordering a full retreat, the Ulian forces found themselves facing a new, terrifying reality. Their carefully planned invasion had crumbled in the face of Earth's relentless biological onslaught. In the Amazon rainforest, Lieutenant Kexara guided her troop transport through the dense canopy, desperately seeking an opening to ascend. The vessel shuddered violently as something massive coiled around its rear thrusters. "What in the void?" Kexara's words were cut short as alarms blared throughout the cockpit. She spun in her chair, eyes widening at the sight of an enormous serpent crushing the ship's engines. "Anaconda!" screamed one of her soldiers, panic evident in his voice. The transport listed sharply, plummeting towards the murky waters below. Kexara frantically punched the emergency release, blowing the hatches. "Abandon ship!" she yelled, her words nearly drowned out by the screech of twisting metal. As they hit the water, a new horror awaited. The river's surface erupted in a frenzy of snapping jaws and razor-sharp teeth. Piranha swarmed around the sinking craft, their primitive hunger overwhelming any Ulian defense. Kexara watched in horror as her soldiers were torn apart, their anguished screams echoing across the water. She kicked furiously, fighting against the current and the relentless tide of hungry fish. Her hand found a low-hanging vine, and she hauled herself out of the water, gasping and bleeding. But her reprieve was short-lived. A low growl from the nearby undergrowth froze her in place. Glowing eyes peered out from the shadows, and Kexara realized with a sinking feeling that her ordeal was not nearly finished. Meanwhile, off the Florida coast, Captain Zorn's landing craft bucked and heaved in the choppy waters. The evacuation fleet hovered tantalizingly close, just beyond the breakers. "Push forward!" Zorn bellowed, gripping the railing as another wave crashed over the bow. "We're almost—" A massive dark shape surged beneath the surface, slamming into the craft's hull. Zorn stumbled, nearly losing his footing as the boat lurched sideways. "Orcas!" shouted the helmsman, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They're ramming us!" Before Zorn could respond, a second impact rocked the vessel. Water poured in through a jagged gash in the hull, and he knew they were doomed. "Abandon ship," he ordered, his voice hollow. "Make for the fleet." But as the Ulians dove into the churning surf, they found themselves in a living nightmare. Bull sharks circled in tight formation, their dead eyes fixated on the alien prey. The water soon ran red as the ocean predators tore into the helpless invaders. In the Serengeti, Commander Vexel watched in mounting horror as the horizon darkened with an approaching wall of dust and thundering hooves. "By the void," he whispered. "What is that?" His question was answered moments later as a stampeding herd of wildebeest, zebra, and Cape buffalo crashed through their defensive line. Ulian soldiers scattered in panic, their energy weapons proving useless against the sheer mass of charging animals. Vexel stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding being trampled. He watched helplessly as the herd smashed through their anti-aircraft batteries, leaving nothing but twisted metal in their wake. The roar of human aircraft filled the air, and Vexel looked up to see a squadron of Earth fighters swooping low over the battlefield. With their ground defenses obliterated by the stampede, the Ulian transports were sitting ducks. As explosions bloomed across the sky, Vexel realized the terrible truth. They had grossly underestimated this world and its inhabitants, both human and animal alike. And now they were paying the price. High above the chaos, Commander Ceres' flagship shuddered under a barrage of impacts. He strode onto the bridge, his usual composure shattered. "Report!" he barked, gripping the back of the pilot's chair for support. "Sir, we're under attack by birds," the pilot replied, disbelief evident in his voice. Ceres blinked, certain he had misheard. "Birds?" A violent tremor ran through the ship, nearly knocking him off his feet. On the screen, he watched in stunned silence as swarms of seabirds hurled themselves at the engines, clogging intakes and rupturing fuel lines. "Impossible," Ceres muttered, his knees going weak. How could mere avians coordinate such an assault? The answer came moments later, as a deafening sonic boom shook the bridge. Whales, their massive bodies barely visible in the churning ocean below, unleashed another wave of sonic pulses. Warning klaxons blared as cracks spiderwebbed across the view screen. Ceres felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet as the ship's structural integrity began to fail. "Sir," shouted his communications officer, "we're picking up human transmissions. They've compromised our command codes." Ceres stared out at the devastation below, watching as his invasion force crumbled in the face of Earth's furious counterattack. He had come to conquer this world, but in his arrogance he had overlooked its greatest strength, the sheer, unstoppable force of its biosphere. "Abandon ship," he said quietly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "All hands to escape pods." As Ceres strapped himself into the cramped confines of his personal pod, he caught one last glimpse of his once mighty flagship. Massive fissures tore across its hull, venting atmosphere and debris into the sky. The pod's engines ignited, rocketing him away from the doomed vessel. Ceres watched, a mixture of awe and terror gripping him, as his ship broke apart in a series of brilliant explosions. As the escape pod hurtled through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of burning debris in its wake, Ceres realized that their defeat was total. Earth had rejected them, unleashing the full fury of its ecosystem against the alien invaders. And as he plummeted towards an uncertain fate on the planet's surface, Ceres couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. Ceres' escape pod streaked through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of superheated plasma in its wake. The commander gritted his teeth as the tiny vessel shuddered violently, threatening to tear itself apart. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the arid soil of the Australian outback. Dazed but alive, Ceres crawled from the smoking wreckage. He squinted against the harsh sunlight, surveying the desolate landscape. In the distance, he spotted a grounded Ulian dropship, his best chance for escape. As Ceres stumbled toward salvation, a distant rumbling caught his attention. The ground began to vibrate beneath his feet. He turned, eyes widening in a disbelief at the sight of a feathered tsunami bearing down on him. Emus, dozens of them, their powerful legs propelling them across the sun-baked earth at terrifying speed. Ceres broke into a desperate sprint, but the flightless birds closed the gap with ease. The lead emu overtook him, delivering a bone-crushing kick to Ceres's back. He tumbled to the ground, gasping for air. As he struggled to his feet, the rest of the flock descended upon him in a flurry of razor-sharp claws and stabbing beaks. Ceres fought through the pain, crawling inch by agonizing inch towards the dropship. Blood streamed from countless lacerations as the relentless birds continued their assault. Just when he thought he could endure no more, a familiar whine cut through the air. Human energy weapons. The emus scattered as concentrated fire rained down on the dropship. Ceres watched in horror as the vessel's hull buckled and warped under the barrage. His last hope of escape went up in flames. Across the globe, similar scenes of desperation played out. In the skies above Shanghai, Lieutenant Krelax nursed his battered transport towards the promised salvation of an orbiting battlecruiser. Warning lights flooded the cockpit as system after system failed. "We're almost there," Krelax muttered, more to himself than his terrified crew. "Just a little further." A dull thud reverberated through the ship's hull, then another and another. "What is that?" demanded Krelax. His sensor officer's voice quavered. "Sir, the external arrays are going dark. Something's out there." Krelax peered through the view screen, his stomach lurching at the sight of a massive swarm engulfing the ship. Thousands upon thousands of tiny bodies slammed against the hull, their incessant stinging overwhelming the damaged sensors. Alarms blared as the navigation systems failed. The transport veered wildly off course, spiraling out of control. "Brace for impact!" Krelax shouted. The ship plowed into a dense cloud of even larger insects. Krelax had only a moment to register the horrific sight of Japanese giant hornets pouring through hull breaches, before searing pain erupted throughout his body. His agonized screams joined those of his crew as the hornet's venom liquefied them from within. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, the last vestiges of Ulian High Command huddled in their subterranean fortress. General Zexthor paced nervously, his antennae twitching with each distant explosion. "Status report," he barked. A subordinate's voice crackled over the comm. "Sir, our outer defenses have fallen. Human resistance fighters are—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Zexthor cursed, turning to his assembled staff. "Prepare for—" His words died in his throat as a low buzzing filled the air. From the ventilation ducts poured a tidal wave of black and yellow bodies, Africanized honeybees, their compound eyes glittering with murderous intent. The Ulian commanders fired wildly, energy beams cutting swaths through the swarm. But for every bee that fell, a dozen more took its place. Soon the air was thick with stinging insects. Zexthor staggered towards the exit, swatting frantically at the bees covering his body. He burst through the door, only to find himself face to face with a mountain of fur and muscle. Ted the grizzly bear regarded the alien general with curious menace, his massive jaws parting in a fearsome growl. Zexthor's scream was cut short as Ted's enormous paw swatted him aside like a ragdoll. In low Earth orbit, Admiral Vexia watched the pitiful remnants of her invasion force limping towards her battlecruiser. She closed her eyes, fighting back waves of nausea and shame. "Admiral," her lieutenant cried, "something's wrong with the sun." Vexia's eyes snapped open. The familiar yellow orb was indeed vanishing, swallowed by an impossibly vast shadow. As darkness engulfed the ship, Vexia's blood ran cold. A single word flashed across every screen, accompanied by an antiquated distress signal. "Leviathanids!" The bridge erupted in panic as the monstrous form of a space-dwelling organism dwarfed their vessel. Vexia could only stare in mute horror as tentacles larger than entire continents reached out to embrace her ship, sealing the invaders' fate once and for all. The Leviathanid's massive form blotted out the stars as it bore down on Admiral Vexia's battlecruiser. Vexia's hands flew across the command console, initiating evasive maneuvers. "All weapons, fire at will," she barked. The cruiser's arsenal blazed to life, energy beams and missiles streaking towards the cosmic behemoth. They impacted harmlessly against its layered hide, dissipating like raindrops on armor plating. A tremor ran through the ship as cable-like tendrils lashed out, their diamond-hard tips piercing the hull with sickening ease. Alarms blared as atmosphere vented into the void. "Seal all bulkheads," Vexia ordered, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her hearts. "Reroute power to shields." But it was too late. Swarms of smaller organisms poured through the breaches, overwhelming the crew's desperate attempts at defense. Vexia watched in horror as her bridge officers fell, one by one, to the relentless parasitic drones. With trembling fingers, she activated the ship-wide comm. "This is Admiral Vexia. All hands abandon ship. I repeat, abandon—" A tentacle burst through the deck plating, wrapping around her leg. Vexia screamed as she was dragged towards a gaping maw in the creature's underbelly. With her last ounce of strength, she slammed her fist down on the distress beacon, praying it would reach the invasion fleet. Moments later, the cruiser vanished in a crushing implosion, compressed into a singularity by the Leviathanid's immense power. A handful of life pods tumbled away, carrying the last survivors of the once mighty Ulian force. On Earth, Sergeant Samuel Taylor strode through the liberated streets of Washington, D.C., coordinating with local authorities to restore order. The city bore the scars of occupation, but hope blossomed in the faces of its people. "Sam!" a familiar voice called out. Taylor turned, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Joe!" His brother Joseph, whom he had long thought lost, stood before him. The two men embraced, years of estrangement melting away in an instant. "I thought you were dead," Taylor said, his voice thick with emotion. Joseph shook his head, his expression grave. "I've been in hiding, gathering intel. Sam, there's something you need to know." As Joseph spoke, revealing the existence of a secret UN program to unlock human genetic potential, Taylor felt a chill run down his spine. The implications were staggering. "You're saying there's a group of enhanced humans pulling the strings?" Taylor asked, struggling to process the information. Joseph nodded. "They've been manipulating events from the shadows. The alien invasion might have just been the beginning." Taylor's mind raced. They had defeated one enemy, only to find themselves facing an even greater threat from within. As he looked out over the recovering city, he knew their fight for humanity's future was nowhere near the end. Taylor's mind reeled as he processed Joseph's revelations. The bustling streets of Washington, D.C. suddenly felt alien, teeming with potential threats. "Project Apotheosis," Taylor muttered, tasting the words. "How deep does this go?" Joseph's eyes darted nervously. "Deeper than we ever imagined. The UN, governments, military brass, they're all complicit." A nearby commotion drew their attention. A group of civilians huddled around a public view screen, their faces etched with concern. Taylor shouldered his way through the crowd, Joseph close behind. The screen flickered with grainy footage of a refugee camp. People milled about, going about their daily routines. Suddenly, bodies began to rise into the air, flailing helplessly. Screams erupted as entire groups were lifted skyward by an invisible force. "My God," Taylor breathed. "It's happening already." The footage cut to a military outpost. Soldiers convulsed on the ground, clawing at their heads. A shadowy figure strode through their ranks, radiating an aura of terror. Joseph gripped Taylor's arm. "We need to warn the others. Now." They sprinted through the streets, dodging bewildered civilians. Taylor's comm unit crackled to life, flooding with panicked reports from across the globe. "This is Captain Rodriguez. We're under attack by, I don't know what, some kind of psychic assault." "Johannesburg Command, respond. Entire sections of the refugee zone are just disappearing." "Mayday, Mayday. This is HMS Dauntless. We've lost control of the ship. Something's in our heads." Taylor burst into the makeshift war room, startling the assembled resistance leaders. He quickly briefed them on Project Apotheosis, the room growing tenser with each revelation. General Hawthorne smacked his palm on the table. "So we drove off one invasion just to face another? From our own people?" "We're outmatched," Taylor said grimly. "These enhanced humans have abilities we can't hope to counter. We need allies." A hush fell over the room as the implications sank in. "You can't be serious," Colonel Yin protested. "After everything they did to us?" Taylor met her gaze steadily. "We don't have a choice. It's either that or watch humanity fall to apotheosis." With great reluctance, the council agreed. Taylor found himself drafting messages to former enemies, scattered Ullian commanders, resistance cells in other countries, even the remnants of criminal syndicates. As reports of mass abductions and psychic attacks flooded in, Taylor felt the weight of billions of lives on his shoulders. He stared at the global strategic display, watching as vast swaths of population centers winked out. "Where are they taking all those people?" Joseph wondered aloud. Taylor's eyes hardened. "I don't know, but we're going to find out, and we're going to stop them, whatever it takes." Taylor's fingers flew across the comm panel, inputting a series of encrypted coordinates. His heart made as he initiated the transmission, knowing full well the enormity of what he was about to do. "This is Sergeant Samuel Taylor of Earth Resistance Command to any surviving Ullian forces. We face a common threat. Request immediate communication." Seconds stretched into minutes as Taylor and his team waited in tense silence. Just as hope began to fade, the comm crackled to life. "This is Admiral Vexia of the Ullian Remnant Fleet. Speak quickly, human." Taylor exhaled sharply, locking eyes with Joseph. "Admiral, we have intel on a greater danger than either of us anticipated. Are you aware of Project Apotheosis?" A pause, then, "Elaborate." As Taylor laid out the situation, Vexia's voice grew increasingly grave. She revealed the shocking truth. A secret Ullian cabal had been manipulating Apotheosis for years, only to have their plans upended by the transhuman uprising. "We propose a temporary alliance," Taylor said, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. "Share intelligence, coordinate our efforts. It may be our only chance." Another long pause. "Agreed. Transmitting data now." Encrypted files flooded the Resistance's systems, painting a horrifying picture of Apotheosis's true capabilities. Taylor's blood ran cold as he processed the information. "Sir," a technician called out, "multiple abduction reports coming in worldwide, entire cities going dark." Taylor sprinted to the main display, watching in horror as population centers winked out across the globe. "What the hell are they doing?" The answer came moments later as footage poured in from surviving outposts. Massive centipede-like creatures, Arthropleura, according to Vexia's intel, swarmed through streets and buildings, snatching up terrified civilians in their segmented bodies. "Zoomancers," Joseph whispered, his face ashen. "They're using prehistoric DNA, too." His words cut off as a piercing shriek filled the air. The bunker's reinforced walls buckled inward, steel warping like putty. Taylor barely had time to shout a warning before chaos erupted. Twisted chimeric horrors burst through the breach, part bat, part elephant. Their hypersonic screams shattered equipment and sent resistance fighters reeling. Taylor's rifle blazed, but the creatures shrugged off the impacts. "Fall back!" he roared, dragging a stunned soldier to his feet. "Regroup at—" A sinuous shape slithered through the carnage, its multiple heads weaving a tapestry of terror. The terror. Hydra's eyes locked onto Taylor, projecting nightmarish visions directly into his mind. He stumbled, fighting to maintain his grip on reality. Through the haze of psychic assault, Taylor saw Joseph grappling with one of the bat-elephant monstrosities. Their eyes met for a split second before Joseph was lifted bodily into the air, vanishing into the maelstrom of wings and fangs. "No!" Taylor screamed, but it was too late. His brother was gone. Days blurred together as Taylor coordinated hit-and-run strikes against Apotheosis strongholds. Vexia's orbital bombardments bought them precious time, shattering transhuman research facilities across continents. But the tide of mutated horrors seemed endless. It all led to this moment. Taylor stood before a force field containing dozens of captives, including Joseph, but his brother's eyes were vacant, his movements jerky and unnatural. The experimental psychic indoctrination had done its work. "Sam," a soldier pleaded, "that's my sister in there. We can't just—" Taylor raised a hand, silencing him. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Before him lay an impossible choice: sacrifice the brainwashed victims to stop apotheosis, or risk everything on an audacious attempt for peace. He stared into Joseph's empty eyes, searching for any trace of the man he once knew. In that moment, Taylor knew his next action would shape the future of both humanity and their newfound alien allies. His hand hovered over the detonator, trembling with the magnitude of his decision. Taylor's hand fell away from the detonator. He couldn't do it. Not like this. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "We're changing tactics." The soldier beside him lowered his weapon, confusion etched on his face. "Sir?" Taylor activated his comm unit. "Admiral Vexia, this is Taylor. We need to talk." Minutes later, Taylor stood before a holographic projection of the Ulian admiral. Her alien features were inscrutable, but her voice carried a note of weariness. "You propose an alliance, human, after all that has transpired?" Taylor nodded grimly. "We're out of options. Apotheosis has outmaneuvered us at every turn. Their tech, their abilities, we can't match them. Not alone." Vexia's eyes narrowed. "And what do you offer in return?" "Intel, a way in." Taylor outlined his plan. A false parley, a chance to strike at Apotheosis's heart. The Admiral was silent for a long moment. "Very well, we will provide chronostasis support. But know this, Taylor, if you betray us, what remains of your world will burn." The next hours were a blur of preparation. Human rebels and Ulian commandos drilled on infiltration tactics. Weapons were distributed, plans finalized. Taylor felt the weight of billions of lives on his shoulders as he donned his combat gear. At the designated time, Taylor stepped into the negotiation chamber. The air shimmered with temporal distortion, courtesy of Vexia's orbiting ships. Apotheosis's security systems would register nothing amiss. Dr. Sakura Iwazaru awaited him, her form a writhing mass of iridescent tendrils and crystalline nodes. Flanking her were grotesque hybrids, part animal, part human. All wrong. And there, vacant-eyed and rigid, stood Joseph. "Sergeant Taylor," Iwazaru's voice reverberated through multiple mouths. "Have you come to embrace transcendence?" Taylor's teeth gritted as he listened to her grandiose speech. The arrogance, the utter disregard for free will. His fingers twitched, longing for the trigger of his concealed weapon. "Never!" he spat when she finished. It was the signal. Chaos erupted as his strike teams materialized. Gunfire and energy blasts filled the air. Mutated monstrosities howled and charged. In the melee, Taylor saw Joseph lurch forward, shielding Iwazaru from a plasma burst. His brother crumpled, a smoking hole in his chest. "No!" Taylor roared, but there was no time to mourn. Iwazaru, her avatar form partially destroyed, retreated deeper into the complex. Taylor and his forces gave chase, fighting through nightmarish corridors lined with pulsing, organic tech. They breached the central chamber and recoiled in horror. A colossal orb of writhing flesh dominated the space, tendrils snaking out to interface with countless pods. Each contained a human form, twisted and mutated beyond recognition. "By all that's holy," someone whispered. Taylor's comm crackled. "Sergeant, this is Vexia. We've located their geothermal power source. On your command, we'll initiate bombardment." Taylor surveyed the abomination before him, the millions of lives already lost. His decision crystallized. "Do it," he ordered. "Burn it all."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.